Okay, before the video starts, I'm editing this at home over Thanksgiving without any of my actual recording equipment, so please be gracious with the quality of my voice. I was a little bit sick, and I can't re-record anything, but I tried to do the best I could. So, and with that, the video, here you go.
Guys, I think I missed something. This calls for a change of clothing. There we go, that's better. So, in part 1 of Chroma Key Theory, I delved deep into the symbolism of so many colors in Five Nights at Freddy's. The nuanced and layered natures of purple, yellow, blue, orange, black, white, and most of all, green. However, there was one color I half-intentionally neglected, for the sake of it not just taking over the video. And many of you wonderful freaks commented on that video asking me about this missing color, and especially in regard to our favorite white boy, Michael Afton. That color is red. So let's talk about it. But I do just want to take a quick moment to thank you all for the immense support on part 1 while I have this captive audience. Y'all are the best. I mean it. Thank you all for being so nice in the comments, and here's to a glorious future of Mori Mortimer theories. Now, on to the theory. What is red? Red is a very popular color, the unofficial boys' color after blue, the angrier form of pink, and purple's angsty straight cousin. In color theory, red is probably one of the most loaded colors out there. It is the color of love, rage, the blood of life, and that which is spilled when life is taken. As with almost every color I described in part 1, red carries both positive and negative connotations, but in my opinion, red is the most intense of all colors in both their positive and negative meanings. But how does this connect to FNAF? I was very scarce in my mentions of red in part 1 of Chroma Key Theory, mostly for the reason that the video was primarily focused on the individualized colors of each of the characters. Purple and yellow for William, purple and gray for Michael, yellow and purple for Henry, green and yellow for Fiona with a fuck ton of green for the M1 program, blue and orange for Edwin, orange for Remnant in general, and the coalescence of all of those ideas in the theory I now call Tulpa David. The idea that the F10 console was thinking so hard about bringing her son back that her thoughts leaked into the 0-point field, influencing major events of the series. But there were just as many major players that I largely neglected during the first part, mostly because they didn't factor into building Tulpa David, but also because they each shared a more universal association. Those characters being Foxy, Springtrap, not William Afton, but specifically Springtrap, Elizabeth Afton, Circus Baby, Andrew, Montgomery Gator, Cassie, Roxanne Wolf, Vanessa, and Vanning. A fuck ton of characters I barely mentioned, if at all. But look at the visuals I've presented on screen for you here. Notice anything they have in common? That's right, they all have red as pretty major parts of their visual design, and I think I know why. But first, I need to set up how I'll be presenting this. In part 1, I mostly use these redesigns made by yours on truly to represent all of the human characters I was delving into, along with these images for the F10N4 console and the M2 robot. Why, you ask? Because I wanted a consistent visual style across my video. I'm nothing if not stylistic. I didn't want to be using 8-bit sprites from FNAF 3 in contrast with the incredibly detailed portrait work from Secret of the Mimic. Don't even get me started on how much I hate Henry's canon looks. Burn them with fire. I also wanted to bring forward a lot of the concepts I believe these characters embody. I based William, and therefore Michael and the Crying Child, on Walt Disney, as well as Dave Miller from the graphic novel of The Silver Eyes, with a few adjustments, such as those amber irises and a more full frame. The sharp features, the pale skin and dark hair, with that devilishly charming smile allowed me to allude to the fact that I think of William as not just a slimy businessman, which Walt Disney most certainly was, but a genuine creative visionary that took credit for a lot more than just his creations. I based Henry off of Jim Henson, a much more, shall we say, scrupulous titan of entertainment than Mr. Disney, much like Henry in comparison to William. I didn't take any inspiration from his look in the novels since he looks way too similar to William Afton, in my opinion. Plus, that dogshit design from the character encyclopedia is the closest thing we have to a canon design for what Henry looked like in the game's continuity. So that design is primarily a major improvement on that look, along with a significant visual inspo from Jim Henson's warm and welcoming visage. Edwin Murray was based on Bill Gates for my redesign. Given the portrait we have of him, I noticed a lot of similarities to how Bill Gates looked in the 90s, when he was just getting started, and the parallels between the two tech bros are unmistakable. Bill Gates just went in a different direction than going crazy and making an evil mimic robot that ended up killing him. That is, if Edwin is really dead. And Fiona was largely based on her canon look, which is absolutely beautiful, by the way. I wanted to change as few things as possible, since the portraits by Angel Manila really captured her essence. I'll be getting into that later, but I absolutely love the designs for the human women we get in this series. And David, well... Anyway, I'd like to introduce my second batch of redesigns for Part 2, featuring all of the characters you see pictured here. And with that, into the theory. Let's start with the first instances of red in character design we get in the first few FNAF games, Foxy and his web of associations. Of the core Freddy's band of characters we get in FNAF 1 through 4, Foxy is the only character whose primary color is red. Other fellas like Toy Freddy, the Puppet, Bonnie, Monty, and Balloon Boy have some red accents in their designs, but Foxy is all red all the time. No, Mangle, you don't count, that red bow tie is all you have. And what makes it even more interesting is how Foxy is such a unique character throughout the series. In FNAF 1, his whole check on Pirate Cove and if you don't do that I'm gonna run really fast at you thing is unique. His jump scare was so different that people didn't actually believe he was malevolent. He has another unique mechanic and jump scare in FNAF 2. In FNAF 3, he's not really that strange at all, but we're gonna get into that game a lot more later. He has the unique mechanic of the closet in FNAF 4. Funtime Foxy has the motion sensor gimmick in Sister Location. There's nothing in FNAF 6, and Ultimate Custom Night is a very unique game for every character featured. There is the Foxy Dark Ride in Curse of Dreadbear where Captain Foxy will kill you if you score too high, but that's mostly for a joke. But Curse of Dreadbear's true innovation on the Foxy character is that of Grim Foxy, a character that would just be considered Jacko Foxy if not for the fact that his hook has been replaced with a sickle and his head is not that of Nightmare Foxy. In Security Breach, Ruin, and Help Wanted 2, as well as Secret of the Mimic, Foxy is present, but not as any kind of major character. Instead, he's relegated to the background, only majorly showing up in Help Wanted 2's Foxy Log Flume Ride, and Secret of the Mimic's Puppet Show, which can technically be considered the earliest appearance of Foxy in the FNAF timeline. Foxy is also heavily associated with Michael Afton. Our first look at him that wasn't behind our screens as the player character, as we all assume, is FNAF 4's Foxy Bro. He is never seen without his iconic Foxy mask throughout any of the FNAF 4 Between Night minigames, which he uses to terrify his poor brother Dave. In the survival logbook, Foxy is the stand-in character for the security guard at Fazbear's Fright, which has been all but confirmed to be Michael Afton. Michael is tied heavily to Foxy, which I find very interesting. I said before that his prime colors are purple and gray, but adding red into the mix makes things much more interesting. And it's not like William is associated with the color red at all. Well, that's not entirely true. Let's return to Fazbear's Fright. Five Nights at Freddy's 3. Springtrap is visually interesting, to say the least. Throughout the minigames between the nights of FNAF 3, we see the purple guy sprite representing William Afton, and we eventually see him climb into the yellow Spring Bonnie suit, which fails, impaling our poor aubergine fellow, condemning him to an afterlife trapped on Earth, locked within the spring-lock suit which he used to execute his bloody murders. And by the time we reach FNAF 3, that suit is no longer yellow, having withered and rotted to a moldy green. All that remains of William Afton within the suit are the deep red sinew and fleshy bits stretched and mangled across the suit's metallic parts. We learned about complementary colors in part 1 of this theory, and I want to introduce another element of color theory: adjacent and analogous colors. On a traditional color wheel, all colors exist in proximity to each other, and each color on a hexagonal formation of the color wheel, that is, a formation comprised of only the 6 primary and secondary colors, has 2 colors that are directly next to them, which are called adjacent colors. For purple, those colors are red and blue, which are also the same primary colors that form purple when they're mixed. In the world of color schemes, an analogous color scheme is formed when using a color and the 2 colors adjacent to it, like red, purple, and blue. This little redesign of mine actually incorporates the 2 adjacent colors of red and purple. I would have factored in some blue, but unfortunately the human who formed me from the abyss really likes dual color schemes and only occasionally allows me to use more than 2, which usually means a secondary triad. That means green, purple, and orange. Now let's compare Springtrap to regular William Afton. Red and green, purple and yellow. Springtrap uses adjacent colors to William, shifting clockwise from purple to red and from yellow to green. Fascinating, right? But what does that mean? Well, let's draw on the idea of the unnatural in color theory. Purple was the color I most heavily associated with the unnatural, but having it shift over to red gives Springtrap a much more alive feel, which is ironic due to his nature as a more undead creature. But yellow does something very interesting by changing to green. It has a very natural explanation for doing this, since the rot and decay that caused this moldy hue are perfectly normal processes. But when factored into Fazbear's Fright with its Saw 2-esque color grading, it actually leans more into the cowardly and deceptive angles I illustrated with yellow, since Springtrap often blends into the environments of the horror attraction, which lends greatly to his fear factor. It brings the unnatural right back into his design. I fucking love color theory. So even though Springtrap uses none of William Afton's typical colors, the meaning of his original color scheme is heightened through the use of adjacent colors. That is why Springtrap and William Afton have always been my favorite characters. I guess character in this franchise. And the best part of it is, I'm not reading too far into things. The use of green was very intentional when crafting FNAF 3, as stated by Scott Cawthon in his first interview with Dawko.
I even kind of already had color schemes picked out. Like I knew that part 5 should kind of be purples and blues.
Yeah.
I knew that 3 should be kind of green.
So even though we've added red into the mix for Michael Afton's character, it still links him incredibly heavily to his father. It's inescapable. And as I stated in part 1, Michael Afton's look after he's had entered inside of him and then entered outside of him, that denotes him as the purple guy's son, and also links him heavily to Afton's rotten corpse inside of his furry metal prison. And red is a very, very important part of that. However, there is another Afton child which I completely neglected during part 1, whose association with red and green is even stronger than that of Michael Afton. Let's talk about Elizabeth. Elizabeth Afton is a very interesting character. We only hear precious few voice lines from the living Elizabeth Afton, instead gaining most of her characterization from the soul-machine hybrid that is Circus Baby. To anyone familiar with the FNAF series, it will be common knowledge that Elizabeth Afton was the first victim of Circus Baby's patented child entrapment claw, killing her and mangling the spirit of Elizabeth Afton with the cold, unfeeling AI that is Circus Baby. And to anyone unfamiliar with FNAF, well, now you know. Now remember when I said that Foxy was the only character whose primary color is red? Well, I fucking lied. Circus Baby is red all over, mixed in with the white elements that all of the fun times share. And remember all of that stuff I was saying about red and green? There is a subtle point made that Baby's eyes are green. The trailer for Sister Location ends with Baby's eyes lighting up, showing off those emerald irises. But if you happen upon the rare death minigame during Sister Location that allows you to play as Circus Baby, you'll notice that her eyes are blue. And if you make it to the end after feeding all of the children, you'll encounter
a little girl standing by herself. I was no longer myself, and I stopped singing. My stomach opened, and there was ice cream. I couldn't move, at least, not until she stepped closer. There was screaming for a moment, but only for a moment. Then other children rushed in again, but they couldn't hear her over the sounds of their own excitement. I still hear her sometimes. Why did that happen?
And that little girl's eyes are a bright green. When I was writing part 1, I thought about writing a section for Elizabeth Afton, but I thought her colors aren't really associated with any character that much, especially not the Aftons. Red and green, that's not purple and yellow in the slightest. But now I see it. She has the inverse of Springtrap's mostly green with red accents, having her red with the green accents in her eyes. But it doesn't stop there. Look at the appearance of the singular in-game look we get at Elizabeth. Strawberry blonde hair, fair skin, green eyes. Remind you of anyone? That's right, Vanessa Security Breach. A simple character on the surface who is actually one of the most complex characters in the series, second to F10 and 4 in my opinion. Mori Mortimer loves women in Steel Wool games. Vanessa and her counterpart Vanny are going to be my through line to discuss all of the red that exists in modern FNAF, since there is a very large amount of red sprinkled throughout Security Breach's character design. It has been theorized in the past that if Gregory is meant to be some sort of new David Afton, Vanessa is the Elizabeth, and Glamrock Freddy is the Michael.
Hey, he got entered inside of him, dog.
And while I don't personally subscribe to this theory that the Afton family is being directly remade, the idea of Vanessa existing as a second iteration of Elizabeth makes a lot of sense to me, and here's why. Vanessa, the human security guard, shares many of the aforementioned visual similarities to Elizabeth, but she also shares a lot of similar personality traits: innocence, curiosity, and almost what seems to be an unknowingness. Throughout Help Wanted and Security Breach, Vanessa is lured into the clutches of Glitchtrap and made into his puppet, even being described as the reluctant follower. Now, Elizabeth is much more psychotic and sycophantic as Circus Baby, wanting to make Daddy proud. But this is where Vanny comes in. After being scooped up by Glitchtrap, an alternate personality is formed, the psychotic, sycophantic Vanny. And much like Circus Baby, Vanny's color scheme is primarily white and red. Though, like Scrap Baby, Vanny also contains various blue and kind of purple elements. I thought this lovely little bow around her neck was blue for the longest time, but like classic Bonnie, I wouldn't be inclined to disagree if someone were to comment below and tell me that it was purple. Hell, I wouldn't mind if you commented at all. And while you're down there, subscribe. I would not be able to make these kinds of videos if it weren't for the generous support of viewers like you. But anyway, Vanny, the bunny on the thumbnail. Take a close look at her eyes. Typically, they're a pretty vibrant red, but often her eyes will light up, taking on a more orange hue, which I find interesting. The idea that the Pizzaplex is running on Remnant, as originally postulated by She's Always Nervous, slots perfectly in with Vanny having orange as part of her color scheme, especially a glowing, bright orange. But the fact that those eyes are red in their base state is very, very interesting. After all, to get orange from red, you have to add yellow. But I think focusing on the idea that Vanny is a primarily red character who sometimes has glowing orange eyes allows for me to make a very speculative claim that might explain where this yellow color comes from. Agony is red. But what is Agony? Well, in the Stitch Wraith Stingers at the end of every book in the Fazbear Fright series, we are introduced to various characters, the main three being Detective Larson and the two spirits inside of the Stitch Wraith, Jake and Andrew, which served as the original basis for the Golden Duo theory, which have still held strong largely to this day. And I'll get back to Andrew in a minute, but I first need to very briefly talk about Dr. Taggart and Dr. Talbert. These were two scientists who, in the canon of the Stitch Wraith Stingers, developed a theory on how human emotions affected the world. They believed that thoughts and emotions could have such a strong impact on the world that they could infest objects even after the humans who felt those emotions had died. This is also largely based on the real-world ideas of the zero-point field, and the experiments of one Dr. Emoto, who postulated that water could be affected by intense thought and emotion. But this is also the in-universe explanation for Remnant. Remnant is simply the infusing of positive emotions and memories into an object, most often metal. In fact, it's pretty much always metal. Metal specifically is what makes Remnant transferable and gives it all of those qualities that make it Remnant. So for simplicity's sake and not to retread too much ground, Remnant is metal and soul combined. Another concept that is introduced is Agony, which Dr. Talbert postulates to be the strongest emotion. It can infest not just metal, but ordinary objects, places, or even people. In comes Andrew. To give a very brief overview of Andrew's character, in the story, The Man in Room 1280, William Afton's burnt corpse is being haunted by a separate spirit. This spirit is that of a boy named Andrew, who was one of the victims of Afton's many murders in life. Andrew's pain, his agony, is so strong that he keeps Afton alive until he's brought to a Fazbear distribution center, at which point he explodes, getting all of his Afton guts all over a bunch of stuff. This also disperses Andrew's agony onto all of these objects, which is how he ends up haunting the battery of the Fetch robot, which is what gets him into the Stitch Wraith, which Fetch is also the story where the zero-point field is introduced. Andrew is also depicted wearing a green alligator mask. Keep this in mind for a bit later. Agony itself is speculated to have appeared many times over the course of Fazbear Frights, and even in the games. Its only canonical descriptions describe it as a dark, inky substance that corrupts anything it touches. However, there is reason to believe Agony is tied to blood, specifically the spilling of blood. When Afton explodes, he spills his innards all over the objects that then become haunted by his agony, and Andrew's. Agony that was carried by his red, bloody entrails. In Help Wanted, the character of Jeremy is nearly possessed by Glitchtrap, but narrowly averts it by using a guillotine paper slicer to supposedly cut a mask off of his face. But this is what the tape girl says about her experience finding Jeremy the next day.
I came in early that morning. No one else was there. At least that's what I thought. The supply room was lit. I didn't even notice Jeremy standing in the testing room as I walked past. The supply room was so bright, glowing from all the way down the hall. Have you ever heard of a guillotine paper slicer? It sounds made up, but it's an actual piece of office equipment. I didn't even know we had one in the supply room. I guess they're more common at businesses that do a lot of graphic design work. I remember seeing one when I was still in school, and even then, I knew how dangerous it looked. I was always afraid of losing a finger. That seems so silly now. Jeremy used to do design work. I guess that's how he knew it was there. There was something that looked like a Halloween mask laying on the floor. I didn't understand. Ink must have spilled. It was only then that I heard a shuffle from the testing room and realized Jeremy must be there. I went back and peered in the window. I couldn't see his face. He had the visor covering his head. He had ink spilled on himself as well. The front of his shirt looked black in the dark room. He turned his head in my direction, but I don't think he knew I was there.
Tape Girl assumes that ink had spilled. People assume that this was simply her eyes mistaking dried blood for ink in low light. However, the dark room that Jeremy was in was a separate room from the room with the mask in it. The black substance could have been the agony that was created from Jeremy going through the pain of Glitchtrap infesting his mind, but also him having to slice the mask off of his face. However, I think it's a bit of both. The inky agony was formed due to the spilling of Jeremy's blood. Therefore, agony is tied to blood. Agony is black when depicted in Fazbear Frights, but it can also be tied to red. Remember how red is very tied to anger, anguish, and violence. Now let's tie this back to Vanny. She has red eyes, and Vanessa basically went through the same thing that Jeremy went through, except she failed. She was corrupted by the malignant Malhair, and Vanny's red eyes are the bright, glowing symbol of her pain. But remember the orange. Where did the yellow come from to make this glowing mixture? Well, Vanessa has yellow hair. Sure, it's more of a strawberry blonde, but it's yellow. Yellow is one of the most positive colors in the series, despite its connotations of cowardice, lying, and fear. After all, Jake in the Stitch Wraith Stingers turns bad memories, soaked in red agony blood by the way, a bright golden yellow when imbuing them with positive memories. Parallels, baby! Vanny's red eyes, mixing with Vanessa's yellow hair, makes orange. Remnant! Fusion of good and bad. And a way better color than gray. And speaking of gray, we can tie this back to Michael Afton too. He goes through significant pain and agony at the hands of, well, everything under the sun. Just a nice touch in this whole red is agony pie. But there's more I can extract from this still. We are getting close to the end here. Let's bring this all together in the modern era of FNAF. I have yet to mention 3 characters from Security Breach and Ruin that I mentioned in the beginning of this video. Roxanne Wolf, Montgomery Gator, and Cassie. Just looking at them, I'm sure you can see what I'm going to say. Look at how much red and green there are in these fucking character designs. And not just that, every FNAF fan's favorite color, purple. Remember how I mentioned that Andrew wears an alligator mask in Fazbear Frights? Well, there is only one alligator character in the entire FNAF series, and his name is Montgomery Gator. Fellow theorist Gibby's Horror Homestead, that does not feel right to say. Well, it's true. Fellow theorist Gibby's Horror Homestead made an amazing video detailing his thoughts on how he believes Edwin to be Old Man Consequences, because Edwin is represented by Monty Gator. And while this gives him way too many colors for me to be happy with, I'm treating red as separate from any singular character, and you'll see why. The big takeaway that I want to build on and take in my own direction from Gibby's video is Edwin being Montgomery Gator. That gives us William Afton as Bonnie, Michael as Foxy, Henry as Freddy or Fredbear, Fiona as the Sun, Fiona and Henry sort of both being Chica, but it's mostly Fiona, or it's complicated, and Edwin being both Moon and Montgomery Gator. And Bub the dog is, I don't know, fucking phone guy.
You were an obedient dog, a good dog.
But what Monty and alligators represent as a greater whole is actions taken in anger, and the consequences of those actions. Monty is a very violent character, which is why I like him having a lot of red in his color scheme. This also adds yet another meaning onto what is becoming the most nuanced single color in the franchise, that being consequences, regret. I'm personally not an Edwin OMC gal myself, but let's flip it around to green, adding another meaning onto that as well, vengeance. Green is a color of envy as well, which fits perfectly on to Monty and Andrew. Monty, due to his jealousy of Bonnie, which causes him to lash out in anger, killing him, reaping the benefits at first, but later being met with the consequences of those actions. Andrew is kind of the opposite. He is also full of anger and takes out his vengeance on William Afton in the books, not in the games, during his main story. And he also reaps the consequences of being trapped within the Stitch Wraith, but he eventually gets a happy ending at the hands of Jake, who turns his memories into golden joy. And Roxy and Cassie. Roxy is also a very angry wolf, lashing out in narcissistic rage in initially a much less violent form than Monty with his claws of death, but in Ruin, we see the green trait of vengeance come out when she is trying to get her revenge on Gregory for taking her eyes. Gregory, who, mind you, shares none of the same colors as Roxy besides red sneakers. That red violence represented by him crashing a fucking go-kart right into her face. Gregory is blue and orange, whereas Roxy has purple and green. How this factors into Cassie is her being a foil character to Gregory, but instead of sharing her colors with Freddy like Gregory does, she shares hers with Roxy. The red, I believe, is significant of Ruin being very symbolic of the consequences of Gregory's actions during Security Breach, leaving devastation in his 10-year-old wake. And Cassie is so prominently red because she is coming in at the aftermath, falling victim to those consequences. But purple is everywhere in Roxy, Monty, and Cassie's design, and in the AR world Cassie experiences during Ruin, everything is purple. But this video is running longer than expected, and all of this purple talk will be better discussed in part 3, baby. That's right, cliffhanger. I wanted to keep this video shorter, since one of the things that happened to part 1 was it got really big really fast, and that last section was gonna get really big really fast if I didn't cut it off there. Thank you to everyone who has made it this far, and genuinely thank you all for the immense support on part 1. Thanks to you guys, this channel is now monetized. This has all happened so fast, and I'm still kind of reeling from it all, but you'll be getting a lot more than just Chroma Key theory out of me in the future. Channel memberships now exist, and to anyone who joins, you'll get exclusive early access to all of my videos before the general public does. You'll also be acknowledged by name at the end of every video, and get access to members-only content, once I actually have members to give that to. I'm also going to start streaming every so often. I can't promise total consistency, since I'm still very new to all of this, but I'm so grateful that I get the opportunity to be able to gain experience in this whole YouTube world, thanks to you guys. And with that, I'm Mori Mortimer. Memento Mori, and goodbye.